back to the Socialist Shelf. It's me, Jacob, here with Joss.
Hello.
And this week we are getting into, last week we got into a book that we liked, but we didn't so much like the author. This week we're getting into a book. I don't know for sure what Joss is going to say, but I'm not feeling like we're going to walk away giving this one 5 stars, singing its praises. What do you think?
Well, to say nothing of the author, right?
Right, to say nothing of the author. I'm saying, the last few books we've gone over, we've at least been able to praise the books.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give it a fair treatment, but this is no masterpiece, and this is not written by what I'd call a saint, though he may describe himself as one.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into it, I'm just going to say this is Left Behind. This was an absolute phenomenon in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, and we will get into all of that. I can say my personal background with this book, and I'll ask you yours in a second, Joss. My personal background is being raised in a very Christian home, and to be clear, our criticism of this book has nothing to do with criticism of Christianity or anything to do with that. We don't care if you believe in the rapture. That's not what the criticism of this book is about, as you'll soon see. But my background with this book is I read it when I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. I read through this whole series. It was it was like an adult series, and I, as an 11 or 12-year-old, felt pretty cool reading it. It was very popular. It was in the library at the Christian school that I went to, and I really ate it up and found it very enjoyable, and it is an easy book series to read. However, I, like many others, took it incredibly seriously and incredibly literally. Billy Graham himself, the great evangelist, described these books as the second most influential books on Christianity, second only to the Bible. These are, for a large percentage of the population, a lot of the readers, and it has sold over 85 million copies. It is near to gospel as you can get without being gospel. This is taken very literally as an account of what will be the last days, down to a T. And it was so for me for so long that to this day, if I can't find where someone is, the back of my head says, "Oh, rapture." Joss, do you have any background with these books or anything like that before we get into Tim LaHaye and the book itself?
None. I had heard of them, of course, but it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't part of my sort of cultural sphere. I was raised Christian, but in a very, the denomination was it was Disciples of Christ Church, right? It's a very, very liberal, very relaxed denomination. Certainly not militant, certainly not millenarian in the sense that the theology in this book is.
Yes. This is a very niche subsection of Christianity that was much more niche before the books came out and influenced a lot of people. But we will get into that. Let me just hop right in. I'm going to talk. There's 2 authors of this book. There's Jerry B. Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye is the much more influential author that matters a whole lot more to what we're discussing, the meat of the book. Jerry B. Jenkins is ghostwriter would be the wrong term, but it's pretty close to it. He's a writer who's brought onto the project, whose claim to fame is that he can write books that are easily digestible incredibly fast, and that he does. He's published hundreds of books over his career. He's written for all manner of people. I'll talk on him briefly later, but he's written for everyone from the Gaithers to Hank Aaron, the baseball player. I mean, the guy's just, he writes. He's a hustler, and so he hasn't had much impact on the book per se as the style. It was Tim LaHaye who came up with the concepts for the stories, who came up with the theology, and Tim LaHaye who said, this is what we need to do. And it's Jerry B. Jenkins who executed the vision. So that's why Tim LaHaye is the figure I really want to break down. And he is a fascinating figure. You really could do a whole podcast on this guy. I mean, he has a rich history. Right. Tim LaHaye, a right-wing evangelical. He only just died. Well, not just died. He died in 2016. He was age 90. So, that's like, almost, like 6 or 7 years ago. But yeah, I'll go through him. He served in the Air Force in World War II when he was young. And then after that, he went to Bob Jones University, where he met his wife. That is a Christian college that was and still is informally segregated.
Wow.
He got his doctorate in theology from Western Seminary, and then he worked at a church. He was a pastor at Scott Memorial Baptist Church for 25 years. So, his background as a minister, you look him up, it still says Christian minister as his profession. So he was in, Scott's Memorial Baptist. He was in San Diego, where he eventually founded San Diego Christian College in 1971 and a Creationism Research Institute in 1972. In the 1970s, he was a big part of this large-scale movement to Christian schools. Christian schools were opening en masse in the 1970s. While Christian institutions had always existed for education for a variety of reasons, people want to teach their children the values they grew up with and what they want them to grow up with, it is worth noting that a large part of the Christian school boom in the 1970s was a pretense to get white kids out of desegregated schools.
I was about to say how much of it was part of the private school boom in the years after Brown v. Board, and sure enough,
it was massive.
Mm-hmm.
And though Brown v. Board is a little earlier, the 1970s is when the desegregation actually starts to get enforced, when it actually starts to get the ball rolling.
Right, the busing and all that.
Yes, and you have Tim LaHaye working with people like Jerry Falwell. And at the time, you go back to their quotes, they would deny it later in life, but at the time, openly saying part of the reason is because parents shouldn't be forced to send their kids to desegregated schools. This was not inexplicit, this was explicit. They said that was what they were doing. Yes, they were trying to teach their kids about Jesus, but I will say this, there have been schools that have been teaching their kids about Jesus for a long time that were desegregated. These schools were not that. And though later, a lot of those schools would eventually let in, racial minorities. To this day, there's still a lot of whiteness in Christian schools. And I say that as someone who grew up in a Christian school, and I don't, hate everyone who went there. Certainly don't hate everyone who teaches there, family who teaches there, and they can be lovely institutions. But that is what the trend was at the time in the 1970s and the 1980s. And it is a thing that lingers with us today. It's a thing we have to reckon with, no matter what background you come from. But I digress. In 1979, he helped Jerry Falwell Sr., not Junior, Jerry Falwell Sr., who would go on to found Liberty College. He founded the Moral Majority, which is a group of, right-wing evangelicals who helped get Ronald Reagan elected. He sat on the board of directors for it, and at that same time founded the Council for National Policy, supporting the Reagan administration from 1981 onward. At this point, he left the ministry because he was so involved in politics, and he spent a lot of time for the Council of National Policy. Now, if you haven't heard of the Council of National Policy, that's fair enough. The New York Times recently described it as the most influential American group that you've never heard of. It is a small group of, right-wing thinkers and politicians. They guard the list of those who are actually in the council very, very closely to the chest. There was a big leak a few years ago of who was in it, and it was an interesting row of people, described by the Times as a little-known club of a few hundred of the most powerful people in the country. Notable members: Jerry Falwell, of course, Oliver North, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Elsa Prince, mother of Eric Prince, the weapons contractor, and Betsy DeVos, and Virginia Thomas, the QAnon-believing wife of Clarence Thomas. That's to name a few. There's a whole lot more people who are on it: businessmen, politicians, you've got senators, you've got judges. It is a sort of a small council that weirdly reflects what he's sort of projecting onto his enemies in the Left Behind books.
You wonder how much of them are true believers and how many are in it for the influence. Yes,
and much influence they did have, despite speaking on the oppression of their own oppression in this period. They had 3 straight presidential terms of basically unchecked rule under the Reagan administration and the Bush Senior administration. They had this long period of victory, though. LaHaye complained that Reagan did not go far enough fighting against LGBT rights, and was complained about certain laws such as that, which if you know anything about the Reagan administration, was not great on LGBT rights. So Reagan's
press secretary openly mocked LGBT people at several conferences during the height of at several interviews during the height of AIDS. So, it was striking to me that when you mentioned that Tim LaHaye was like, no, that's not enough. You need to be Like I imagine he wouldn't. I imagine he would have put him in camps.
Well, no, there was the faction that was talking about like people with AIDS need like a special tattoo marking them and things like that. That was not that was moral majority position. In fact, Tim LaHaye is quoted calling homosexuals a militantly organized, disgusting group backed by the Illuminati. He is an explicit believer in the Illuminati, by the way, which he claimed is centuries old. I have a quote from his own book he wrote in the 1980s called Rapture Under Attack. And this quote is, quote, I myself have been a 45-year student of the satanically inspired, centuries-old conspiracy to use government, education, and media to destroy every vestige of Christianity within our society and establish a new world order. Having read at least 50 books on the Illuminati, I'm convinced that it exists and can be blamed for many of man's inhumane actions against his fellow man during the past 200 years. End quote. So yeah, he's read over 50 books, so he's an expert.
Oh yeah, and every book on such a subject, you know, it's the scholarship is unimpeachable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I used to be obsessed with and interested in like conspiracy theories when I was, say, 12, 13, right? And so, you know, to hear somebody take it to the truly stunning and like batty conclusion is, I mean, there, but for the grace of you know, whatever God, whatever God that Tim LaHaye doesn't worship.
Well, Tim LaHaye was in his 60s at the time, so he has no such excuse. I once heard it said that there are two types of conspiracy theories: absolutely off the wall, batty, anti-Semitic hogwash, which is this stuff, and stuff the CIA openly admits to doing in their own documents. That really is the two types of conspiracy theories in the world, and unfortunately they get equivocated. But you know, I digress to talk a little more about Tim LaHaye, just really to give you the full picture. He worked Council for National Policy was his big thing, you know, massive influence on the Reagan administration, massive influence on Bush Sr., slightly waned during the Clinton administration when he got on the Left Behind kick, but he was back at it. He he was credited as being one of the people that got George Bush Jr. the nomination. He backed Mike Huckabee's campaign, was his spiritual advisor. Funny enough, in 2008, threatened to support a third-party run if Rudy Giuliani secured the Republican primary, because Rudy Giuliani was too radically left-wing, in his opinion.
Yeah, how crazy would that have been?
Yeah. He was under the impression that Rudy Giuliani, because Rudy Giuliani was not as insane on certain social issues as he was, not to say Rudy Giuliani is not insane, he was willing to break with the Republican Party over that. A lot of dealings with Liberty University, donated millions of dollars there. Their ice hockey arena for their the Liberty Flames is named LaHaye Ice Rink. He also founded the Liberty University Center for Prophecy, which still stands to this day. What else does he has? He worked with the John Birch Society. He was the founder of the Pre-Tribulation Research Center in 1998. He was also an ally of the East Asian religious movement, the Moonies, which, if you may know about, is if you look into them, it's wild, but basically a CIA-funded, right-wing group that definitely goes away from the values Tim LaHaye says he espoused. I mean, you have one of their leaders claiming to be like the reincarnated Christ and stuff. Tim LaHaye had no problem working with them and taking their money, of course, despite, how close, maybe he sounded to the words of someone like Nikolai Carpathia, who he should despise. But the Moonies' money were green. He spent his whole life doing that. And finally, he hit it majorly big. Not that he didn't have money before, but he hit it majorly big with the Left Behind series, when he conceived of the idea on an airplane, seeing a pilot flirt with an airline attendant. He said he assumed the pilot must be married and imagined, what if the rapture happened right now? Kind of creepy and weird.
Yeah, well, and like to if I remember I have the 25th anniversary edition, like mass market paperback of Left Behind, and it lays that out in the essay that prefaces the book. It's, if I remember correctly, LaHaye said these people looked like they were flirting. We don't know we don't know the contours of that conversation except by what he reports, by like how he describes what he saw. It's amazing to me that years and years later, this huge franchise would be spun off of this people watching that was dreamed up entirely in his own head.
Absolutely. But nevertheless, in 1995, Left Behind takes off because he recruits Jerry B. Jenkins, a sports writer who, Jerry B. Jenkins, he's Christian. I will say he's not the ideologue Tim LaHaye is. He tends to avoid such questions when asked. In fact, multiple journalists have even tried to ask him, what sect of Christianity are you? Are you an evangelical? Are you this? Are you that? He has always answered with, I do like his answer. My denomination is Jesus Christ. That's the answer he always comes back with. A snappy answer for a guy who clearly doesn't have one.
And whatever you want me to be, baby.
Yeah, exactly. He is a hustler. Like, he is on his grind. And you can look at his history. I mean, the guy has written hundreds of books. He was in the autobiography business for a while, ghostwriting autobiographies. He was helping people do sports writing. He was in magazines. He was in novels. Later on, he would found his own vanity press. Then later on after that, and to what he does to this day, he offers uncredited courses in writing online for exorbitant sums of money, despite he himself claiming he is not a good writer. I mean, the guy's a hustler. I don't find him nearly as interesting as Tim LaHaye. He just writes the shoddy prose. Like, that's what Jerry B. Jenkins does. And so you get why he wouldn't self-describe as a good writer. But what he has that a lot of writers that I myself struggle with is discipline, is the ability to crank out prose that's serviceable on a consistent and regular and very, very prolific basis. I've got a great quote from Jenkins directly on his own career, and it's, quote, I write the best I can. I know I'm never going to be revered as some classic writer. I don't claim to be C.S. Lewis. The literary type writers, I admire them. I wish I was smart enough to write a book that's hard to read, end quote. I mean, he's not pretending to be what he's not. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He sees the money, he writes, and I mean, Left Behind is what it is because it is remarkably easy to read. It is it goes down very smoothly. As bad as the prose is, it's incredibly easy to consume with incredible speed. I mean, it's I'll say it a little later, but it is like dime store quality novel, but due to the era and the audience to which it is released, it is able to become this massive phenomenon. And phenomenon it is. It spawned 16 adult novels, 40 children's books, 4 movies, countless devotional audio dramas, tie-in theology books, and even an RTS video game. Nearly 80 million copies of the series have sold. And that's a pretty old number. It may be more now. This is a massively valuable property that made a ton of money. And the books were being released until I believe 2006 was the last one. The last one was released in 2006. Get this, on June 6th, 2006, Tim LaHaye released it that day because he said it was auspicious due to 666. It would get people to pay attention to the book. Man was in his 80s and he was still like, how can I really get the last bit of juice out of this?
Oh man, and he had to compete with the remake of The Omen releasing that day.
Exactly. I don't know how he thought he could hustle. It is true that the later books actually fell off a little bit. After Glorious appearing, no one really cared anymore.
And these are all like almost 400-page books.
They're big.
So yeah, 16 books, space of about 11 years. Yeah.
Oh yeah, not to mention Jerry B. Jenkins also wrote the children's books and I think oversaw the writing of the graphic novels.
Yeah, and it wasn't all Jerry B. Jenkins doing the books. I think a couple of them were by Mel Odom, who I know from writing some of the Diablo novels. So gotcha. It brought in several freelancers. It grew much bigger than just the LaHaye Jenkins collab.
Yeah, and LaHaye did write bits of it. There are in the later books entire sections, and there's a couple in these where you can tell they're just LaHaye sections, and it's when one of the pastors just talks. There'll be blocks of paragraphs that are just like clearly LaHaye. If you like look at his speeches, just him talking. There's a character later on named Zion ben Judah, in wild name, but Zion ben Judah will write these blog posts that take up like 10 pages, and it's just pure LaHaye. So he does like get a little more like, he wants a little more of his fingers in the pot the later it goes. But even in this, you can tell the sections with Pastor Bruce have more of LaHaye in them.
I was just thinking, yeah, because it's just straight up. Okay, here's the theology that you need to buy into for
Right.
this particular thing to be plausible.
LaHaye would eventually go on to write a novel called, I believe, The Theology of Left Behind, and it just is those sections compiled into like a 300-word book. It's or not 300-word, 300-page book or so. It's not a thrilling read, but it lays things out. It lays out his specific ideology, which is based on the teachings of John Nelson Darby, an American preacher from the 1830s, who came up with the modern conception of the rapture. And as I've talked for quite a bit now, Josh, you want to give the rundown on what the concept of the rapture is, because it's not really in the Bible.
Yeah, like it's backdated, certainly. Like they find verses that claim, okay, well, it says this here, so I interpret it this way, but no, it's as you say, it's younger than this country, of course.
Yes.
And it comes out of a time where there was a bunch of it was one of the Great Awakenings. I can't remember.
Yeah.
The Second Great Awakening. Yeah. So there was a lot of prophecy going around, a lot of Christian revivals, Protestant revival in this country, and a lot of utopian projects as well. People moving into communities and trying to make that work. Interesting period. But no. So the rapture itself is this idea that at some point in the future, in the very near future, some people believe, true believing Christians will be taken to heaven. The classic image, the classic trope is leaving their clothes behind and just, taken to heaven. They receive their final reward. And then there's going to be 7 years on earth of hardship. And then the actual apocalypse happens.
Which is fascinating. The vast majority of Christians today, and throughout history before the 1830s, all Christians believed the second coming and the rapture to be the same event. This specific interpretation of the Bible said that there were two events. There was the second coming of Christ when he would come and conquer the earth, and there was the rapture specifically, which is, this instantaneous moment. And there are parts of the Bible that says Jesus will come in the blink of an eye. No one knows the day and the hour, that sort of thing. And you can see how it gets drawn. That I will say, as someone who's read through the Bible very thoroughly, the conclusive picture that it paints is much more like a picture. It is much more abstract, especially the book of Revelation. It is so broad and big, and I don't really need to give my own theological leanings here or exactly how I would break it all down. But I will say, when you look at the scriptures they pull to justify the rapture as a concept, it would probably at a certain point be more honest for them to write their own book of the Bible. It's not intellectually honest, the thing they put together here, and it gets less and less intellectually honest the more lore they add about the Antichrist and this, that, and the other, which they pull from across the Bible completely out of context into its own sort of thing. It's literal where they want it to be. It's a metaphor where they want it to be. The beast rising out of the sea doesn't get to be a literal thing. That's a figurative thing. But when it says something about a blink of an eye, that can't mean, you'll be surprised by it. That has to mean you'll literally be ripped out of your clothes. It's and it's fine. Religion adapts, and people find things and they see things, and it's okay. But they wrote this book sort of with this intention of laying out this theology, and it was to a certain extent by a lot of people, especially coming up on the end of the 20th century, right before the Y2K craze, it was taken as gospel by a lot of people. And yes, it would have been more honest if they had written their own book of the Bible, but they basically did with these books for millions of people.
Which is funny because, like, isn't there a part of the Bible that says don't add or subtract anything?
I mean, it says, yeah, not a dot or tittle from the Bible shall fade away. The word of God is immutable. And of course, they wouldn't say, oh, we're writing scripture here. But the way they present these events is, this is what is going to happen. This is unarguable. This is literal. And, the pastor of the church who's been left behind is able to leave a video and who knows exactly every detail of everything that's going to happen. I mean, it's incredibly disingenuous. Yeah, and I'll say, like, it's just not what most Christians believe. And most people, they read the book of Revelation, they will read some prophecy in Ezekiel and Daniel. They're like, yeah, this is poetry, man. Like, this speaks somewhere very deep. Heck, I read Billy Graham's own book on the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse that he wrote in, I believe, the 1980s prior to these books. And in those books, Billy Graham says the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Billy Graham, massive evangelical, moral majority guy, says, oh, the Four Horsemen, they're definitely just a warning from Christ. Like, if we don't clean up our act, we will face war, disease, famine, plague, death. By the 2000s, after Left Behind, you would never hear anyone in that movement utter something like that, because this is law now for so many people, even people who haven't read the books. It's really, and I mean, Billy Graham himself did say these are the second most important Christian documents, second only to the Bible. I mean, it is treated as the Bible. And after rereading it, man, do Christians deserve something better as their follow-up to the Bible.
Yeah, and it's sad, because Christian media, Christian rock, Christian films, they have this reputation for being kind of shoddy, as opposed, because it's more about the message than the artistic quality of the work.
Right. And the distribution networks are different.
Yeah, so it's, the stereotype doesn't fall out of the sky, but there's stuff that's certainly informed by Christianity that you don't have to be a Christian to consume and appreciate. I'm thinking of the Book of Eli right now. That's another
sure.
That's an apocalyptic
Passion of the
film
Christ.
that's
don't like Mel
good.
Gibson, but
yeah,
come on.
Mm-hmm.
It's got its qualities, there's good content out there.
Yeah, but if you want to engage with if you want to engage with what I think I'm correct in describing as the example of what people think of when they think Christian media, this is it.
Mm-hmm. This sort of thing for books. And then the movies, admittedly, Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins said later on that they actually really hated the movies, and when they sold the rights, expected a lot more. Which the movie is pretty rough. But
better than the book, I think.
It's more concise than the book, and so I think it's better than the book, just because the book really wanders, and we'll get into the plot, but yeah, absolutely. It's very strange, and people think of some of the the sort of cliche Christian children's media, this, that, and the other, gets thrown in there, and some of that's due to funding, some of that's due to the distribution networks, like similar to Left Behind movies. A lot of the films get first released into churches and played in church basements, and then they might get a limited theatrical release. So it's not like a very good model for making money. It's a very good model for getting your message out, at least to the people you already sort of interact with.
Certainly.
But Left Behind broke through the barriers despite its shoddy quality. And it's worth noting, it's not necessarily worse than a lot of in quality than certain terrible genre books that get popularity, but this took off in an insane way. I mean, I think half of these books debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. These were huge. These broke out of Christian circles. It wasn't just, I mean, or at least it's evangelical circles it was written to. I don't think anyone expected the craze. And I don't know why, because when you read it, it's not particularly compelling. I don't think.
Yeah, there were parts of it that I definitely found myself wanting to skim, especially the big blocks of theology.
It is skimmable, and maybe that helps it.
Yeah, it is skimmable. There's some extended dialogues that don't really move the plot forward, that are just kind of people shooting the shit. And credit where it's due. Jerry B. Jenkins isn't bad at writing dialogue.
He's got some okay back and forth, some text conversations, this and that. Yeah.
Right, but you do get the feeling that it's so much padding.
Oh yeah. And yeah, that's just like a good enough time to sort of get into the plot of it, because like I've said what I've had to say about Tim LaHaye and to a lesser extent Jerry B. Jenkins. We know where this is coming from. We know the era this is being released in, 1995. The books will, we read the first book. I've read all the books before. We are not going to read all the books for this podcast. It's not happening.
We could do a whole other podcast on those books.
Someone else can. There's a lot of content, but these books run. This is really a 10-year, 1995 to 2005 phenomena. Turn of the century, end of history for people living in the United States. The Soviet Union is conquered. There are no more worlds. The millennium is approaching, which is full of meaning. Because there's the millennium of Christ's reign that is talked about in the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of meaning both in the years that are changing, but it's also history seems to have stalled in a weird way. America has seemed to reach some kind of zenith of cultural power, which I believe we will look back and say, indeed, it had around the year 2000. At this moment of, maybe not economic prosperity for all by any means, but this moment of, unimpeded GDP growth, of unimpeded, scientific production, of there are no great powers to challenge the United States. It feels like we did history. It's over. It's time to wrap this thing up. And of course, in the same way a lot of movies at the time do, like Fight Club, that kind of movie, it really you start to see the cracks in the American psyche at this end of history. You start to see the sort of the neuroses emerge in this, in the center of this new world empire, feeling like this can't last. This doesn't deserve to last. Something must change. We won. Why do I feel so bad? Et cetera, et cetera. And I really think this book fits into that cultural moment so well. And I just don't think it plays the same way if it came out today.
No, I don't think it would. Yeah. I mean, certainly there's anxiety about the end of the world, and certainly there is that sort of frustration, and very real existential fear. Sure. Now that our generation's broadly downwardly mobile, now that poverty is on the rise in this country, now that more and more people are waking up to the idea that the American dream is accessible only to an increasingly small number of people, and rests on a standard of living that the United States is becoming less and less able to extract from the world unilaterally. So I think, if it came out today, it would be actually. Do you know what? I think it benefited from not coming out in the era of book talk. Right.
That is fair.
Because I mean, certainly it would have a thriving community, but it would also have just as many people dunking on it.
I could see it getting kind of the like the ironic treatment, but it would have so many, like, there'd be discourse about it. And this is not a book that, if it gets discussed too much, is going to hold up, because it is paper thin in places. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also think, like, honestly, the Illuminati and like Nikolai Carpathia type of stuff is almost trite at this point. Like, it's almost like, compared to what, like, the far right are on about now, it's almost like that's old hat. Like, QAnon is so much more insane, like, in its conception, like, of how things are going down than this is. You see the connection, but it's like, so, like, it's almost like this UN taking over the world is almost boring compared to like the new stuff they're on.
Yeah, and I want to dig into that a little more.
Well,
I mean, we can get into that a little bit later, absolutely. But I'll just say, like, there is a certain amount of buy-in that you have to subscribe to, in terms of theology, in terms of politics, in terms of, in parts, basic reality, for this to be plausible.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into the plot.
Great. Yeah. You want to kick it off? Because I have certainly spoken my fair share.
Well, it starts on an airplane, as these things do.
That's also
and yes, and we have our protagonist, a guy named Rayford Steele, who, I mean, you just hear that name and you think, okay, like Leslie Nielsen, Robert Redford, some kind of dashing, kind of a dapper kind of, it's that kind of name,
So handsome. So
He
handsome.
is the
Little salt and
airline.
pepper. Yeah.
Exactly. A jaw not unlike John from Brave New World, right?
Precisely.
Exactly. And yeah, Rayford Steele is this airline flight captain. He's at the top of his game, he has a reputation for being a disciplined and honest worker in his field. Um, and yet he's conflicted. He's conflicted because he is his home life is strained, his marriage is strained. His wife has just his wife Irene has just fallen into this brand of Christianity, much like Tim LaHaye's, that believes the end times are nigh, and that we will be raptured and all that. And it's kind of alienating to him. He himself is Christian. He himself goes to church, but he doesn't really buy into it in the same way that Irene does. And so his that and other factors lead him to kind of have a wandering eye, especially for a stewardess that he's attracted to, Hattie Durham.
Hattie Durham, smoke show.
Yes, indeed. And this is and this is interesting because, like, in the film, their relationship is actually physical.
Yeah.
In the book, it is not. Which, I think that's the nature of the medium. It's much easier to portray a physical relationship, an actual affair that they're having, as opposed to a guy just contemplating it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, I mean, there are large blocks in this book where Rayford is just agonizing over, I'm attracted to her, and am I really attracted to her, or do I just want her for her body? And would it be any different if it were one way or another? And you could cut about 80 pages of musing from this book.
Yep. I mean, it's very funny. Like Hattie is like, if you imagine it from her perspective, and you imagine she's not into it at all. And I don't think that's actually the truth, but you really can, at least for the first 3/4 of it, be like, yeah, Hattie never really was like, oh yeah, this guy like brushed shoulders with him sometimes. He was kind of annoying. He's like a creepy old guy. Like, no, not actually. Like, I think she actually was kind of into him. But like, she is mostly pretty innocent in this, despite being kind of framed as a temptress. She's a 27-year-old stewardess whose like greatest crime is every now and then like she brushes shoulders with him. But to him, she is like the great temptress. She is. I mean, the whore of Babylon will actually show up later in this series, but she is the whore of Babylon for Rayford here.
Oh yeah, going out brushing shoulders with men.
You know how that is on an airplane. It's so hard not to brush shoulders, but totally on purpose. And then you have your other protagonist, Buck Williams, Cameron Williams. He's nicknamed Buck because he's always bucking authority, even though not really.
He's just kind of a nerd.
Pretty normal. He's a writer. He's a writer for like this big newspaper. The movie changes him to be basically a CNN reporter, which actually I think fits a little better with how famous he is. Because like he's basically just like an op-ed writer. It's very funny. But yeah, he works at like like a fake magazine, but it's like supposed to be a Time magazine type thing, or New York Times. And the very beginning of the novel switches between their perspectives because he's on Rayford's plane during this flight. And Buck is remembering how he was recently in Israel with a friend of his, Chaim Rosenzweig. Is it Rosenweg?
Chaim Rosenzweig, yeah.
Chaim Rosenzweig, who invented a formula that made the country of Israel incredibly rich by blooming. Everywhere that was unfertile is now blooming. And while he was there, Russia, for no particular reason aside from jealousy, decided to swoop down from the north and try to bomb Israel out of existence. But fire from the sky consumed the Russian army, and not a single Israeli died. And yeah, that honestly doesn't really factor into the plot that much, but it does cause Buck to believe in a God, though he doesn't quite buy into Jesus. In fact, he's kind of like, I think in his position, it would make sense to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm converting to Judaism.
It really is a It really is kind of in terms of influence and like lasting impact on the world. It's kind of a mid like war of aggression, because you hear about. I mean, first of all, you have to buy that in 2000, Russia was at the height of its power, militarily speaking.
1995, actually.
1995, yes, sorry.
Even less
yeah.
capable of launching an
Oh
airline
yeah,
missile.
yeah. It's I mean the collapse was disastrous, but yeah,
President Boris Yeltsin is launching an attack on Israel. Is the most
Boris
insane.
Yeltsin. Yeah, and and it's interesting. Like Russia invades Israel, and there's this huge divine intervention. The Israeli troops don't even fire a shot. Israeli troops famous for not firing a shot, right?
Right.
And all of Russia's military hardware is wrecked, and then nothing. We don't return to it at all. We don't return to the geopolitical ramifications. We don't know what happens in Russia. We don't know how Russia's treated in the international community. Even toward the end, when Nikolai Carpathia is making his address at the United Nations and he names every single country that's a member state of the United Nations, nobody's thinking, oh, wow, he named Russia. And for a minute there, like everybody forgot their animosity towards this aggressive nation. No, it's Russia attacks Israel and then done. It's maybe the most, the biggest hanging thread that I've ever seen used as a setup.
And I've read the books. They don't do anything with it.
Really?
It's nothing. There's like some references, like remember the attack, but no, it's not. There's like moments where the Israeli government is like, yeah, that's part of the reason we wanted to sign a peace treaty. But like, it's really like, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. Russia's not important. They wanted to reference Ezekiel 37 and 38. And if you read Ezekiel 37 and 38, that is a stretch. Like more than the rapture is a stretch. Like more than maybe anything in this is a stretch. Ezekiel 37, 38 predicting a aerial assault by Russia on the modern nation state of Israel. It talks about a country called Gog from Magog launching an attack, and some like vague stuff about fire and carrion. It's a stretch. Like you could say, oh, okay, they're taking creative license, they're being interesting. I would be fine with that. But no, read his book on the theology of left behind. Tim LaHaye says it is foreseen, it is locked in place that Russia will eventually attack Israel. Like the country of Russia has to, in an almost Calvinist sense, attack Israel and be destroyed at some point. Wild. And
it is.
And I know we keep coming back to Tim LaHaye, but like it's what he believes, and he has his followers, people who know they're his followers and people who don't.
When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. Yeah, it's
a stretch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting if he was like, I'm going to write a speculative novel about the end of the world. I'm going to pull verses. But then when you claim you are speaking for God, you are bordering on blasphemy here.
Well, that is literally like what taking the name of the Lord in vain is, right?
Right. You're bordering on speaking on what this stuff is. And that crosses a line. It crosses a line. But anyway, we got Rayford, we got Buck. What's our inciting incident here, Joss? Because we still haven't actually said it.
Well, it's a little thing called the Rapture.
Woo!
They're on a flight.
Rapture.
Our protagonists are on a flight from Chicago to London, and in the middle of the flight, in the middle of the night, a fair number of passengers just disappear out of their clothes. Hattie reports it to Rayford. Near tears, hysterical. There's a lot of hysterical or shrewish or annoying women in this book, which is we could talk about that. We could talk about that. But yeah, so like Rayford's like, oh, calm down. I'll go see what it's about. And yeah, sure enough, he too is lost for words. It's inexplicable. And we
the last sentence of the first chapter is he knew he had been left behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rayford has that sort of nagging at the back of his head, like idea that, well, what if my wife is right, but he doesn't really want to admit it to himself. And this starts a really wild journey for him.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's not an awful inciting incident for have a lot of people disappear. That's not uninteresting necessarily. It's very boring how they kind of play it all out. It really not enough. The novel doesn't focus that much on the outcome of the disappearances. In fact, society really pulls itself together pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, there are like car wrecks and stuff. Like, yeah, it talks about there's mass car wrecks and plane crashes and people going crazy and suicides. And then it's like, but the bar is open the next week. Like, it's kind of fine by the next week. Rayford's back to flying planes within a couple weeks.
I mean, and that's where the it's where the world building is at its strongest, when it really like reckons with and even acknowledges the cataclysmic event that's taken place. Like there's a part that I quite like, where and it's not my favorite extract certainly, but there's a part that I quite like where it's mentioned that there are a whole bunch of train derailments, and it's going to take forever to clear off the tracks so that freight can get up and running again. And but yeah, other than that, if you outside of the immediate sort of circle of of these protagonists, you really don't get a sense of what has happened to the world, and how total the collapse has been, that it could end where it does.
Yeah, and I the most interesting parts are absolutely, like we were saying, about the actual thing itself. Like, it is interesting. Wow, like the mystery. It doesn't allow there to be enough mystery on what happens. I know people reading this book would probably generally know what's happens, but it doesn't allow the characters to wonder enough, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Especially not Rayford. I mean, Rayford at the end of the first chapter knows what's going on. I think it would be a lot more interesting if there were like some credible counter theories, because there really aren't any presented. There's like some weird line from the UN that, like, for some reason there's a lot of nukes sitting in warehouses and that made people disappear. I don't really get that. So like there's like, it gets thrown out, oh, it's aliens. It would be cool if there was like an actual alien cult or something, some actual stuff that might form. That could be a little more interesting, but it mostly focuses on, Rayford gets the plane landed. Actually, in the Nicolas Cage movie, the whole movie takes place on the plane, and it's just people losing their minds on the plane, going crazy, him trying to land the plane. Not a good movie, but it's an interesting way of looking at the first two chapters of the book.
Is the whole movie that sequence from Airplane, where like there's somebody going crazy and they just get slapped?
Yeah, kind of. At one point, someone grabs the gun from the disappeared air marshal, and then there's a part where there's like a Muslim guy that doesn't understand why he's still there, and then Chloe has to drive and clear out a section on the ground for Rayford to make an emergency landing. It's no good. But yeah,
Nicolas Cage is in it.
Yeah, Nicolas Cage is in it as Rayford, which is a hilarious casting. Hilarious. They really honestly cast the guy. It doesn't matter. Then don't watch the Nicolas Cage movie. Go if you want to see a truly good Nicolas Cage movie, go watch his Five Nights at Freddy's movie, Willy's Wonderland. Anyway, to get back to it, yeah. So there's chaos, and Rayford makes it back to his home, and yeah, his wife is gone, his child is gone, and he gets the drift. He's been left behind. He doesn't exactly know all the theology of it, but he's like, yeah, man, I messed up, and now all the Christians are gone. This sucks. And also all the Christians, and notably all the children under the age of 12 are gone.
So yeah, there's a really bizarre scene. And again, this is one of the only views out into the wider world that we get. Like there's news footage of like a woman who's in labor, and the fetus gets raptured, right? And she delivers the placenta, and it's like there's so much medically wrong with that, but also it lays out right there something that should be fairly obvious, which is that Tim LaHaye believes 100% life begins at conception. So at this age, you're considered innocent.
Yeah, it does talk about that, and also notably the dead Christians disappear as well. My favorite scenes in the book are parts where it's just like there was a funeral and 3 pallbearers and the body disappeared and it toppled over. There was another funeral where no one disappeared. There was a place where a Christian high school team and all the players but one disappeared, and the last player committed suicide and shame, like an actual like, oh, okay, look out into the world. Like it's not incredibly competently written. I mean, it's it's written very dryly. I mean, like, get this, when it like there's I wrote this down because I just found it very funny. When when everyone realizes all the people are gone, it says fear seemed to pervade the cabin. That's a quote. Like it seemed to, it's not well written. It's honestly, like you can just sort of bang this stuff out. It's very simple.
Yeah, it's that language of you really can't latch onto it because again, it seems to. Is it happening? Is it not?
Yeah,
I don't know. You're the author.
Is. Fear is pervading the cabin.
Mhm.
Just say that.
Yeah, exactly.
You can use he uses any metaphor he wants, any simile, any like or as, any kind of cliche. It doesn't matter. He can say something that happened in a blink of an eye. A guy stopped in his tracks. The kind of things a lot of writers who really look very closely at their work and try to eliminate very whatever. Jenkins has no time to scrap that. He has to get to the next page because he has another 10 books due by Monday.
Mhm.
So and Buck has his own. Buck Williams has his own thing. He goes to New York. Everybody's going crazy. He's writing the cover story. And then he's got this contact named Dirk in London who has been warning him about this conspiracy to move to a one world government. And he says, you need to get in this guy. He needs to get over to London to talk to this guy. And then he finds out that Dirk has mysteriously committed suicide, but he knows it's not a real suicide. The movie streamlines this a lot better. And has Dirk get like sniped, and there's like a scene where Buck's running around his apartment getting shot at. We take like a whole foray over to England and have like a run-in with Scotland Yard in the book, and it's like it's very dry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's aspects of it that the movie does better and the book does better. It like the getting to Dirk Burton just in time for him to get offed. Okay, cool. That's a nice action beat that the book was missing. The dynamic in the book where it's revealed that the chief of Scotland Yard is totally in the pocket of the big bad guy. That's pretty cool. That's pretty intimidating. There's things that do make the jump and don't make the jump. It's inconsistent. There are aspects of each one that I like, but they're inconsistent in different ways.
Right. You do find out ultimately in either version, though, there has been a slow building conspiracy. But this group of international bankers who are planning this sort of takeover of the world. And, there's a guy named Jonathan Stonegal and let's see who else. There's the other guy. What's his name?
Todd Cawthron.
Tom Cawthron and they've got people in their pockets and politicians, and they're moving us towards a one world government and a one world currency, and they've already got people down to 3 currencies. And I mean, it literally has a part where get this, Buck is in New York and his boss tells him he needs to meet with these groups. One is the Jewish nationalist leaders interested in a one world government, and the other is Orthodox Jews from all over. And Buck says literally, I'm being overrun by Jews. I mean,
wow. Yeah.
It's
and we don't even meet these groups.
No, he just likes to mention them like it's their fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much if you are the sort of person who believes in this, LaHaye doesn't come right out and say there's a Jewish conspiracy to control the world, but if you're the sort of crank who believes in that sort of thing, the pieces are there for you to put together.
I mean, it's the international bankers. It's all the 7-year treaty all comes back to Israel and the building of the temple. They bring it back to the Middle East with the one world government being situated in what they call New Babylon. It all hangs on Israel, which is very interesting because Tim LaHaye is a massive supporter of Israel, as is most of the right. In a very complicated way. And I, the politics of Israel are complicated, and this book doesn't, it focuses on a very specific subsection of them. But there is an idea that Israel needs to rise to prominence in certain evangelical circles, that the end of the world will be ushered in. It is worth noting that these circles do not believe that Jewish people go to heaven. They do believe that Jewish people are God's chosen people. They believe God will protect them from attacks from Russia, but not that they will be protected on Judgment Day. No Jews are getting, that aren't Christians as well, are getting rapture. Chaim Rosenzweig, he's still on earth, despite being devout. And Zion ben Judah, who will be later a massive character in the series. Wow, I hate saying that name.
Zion ben Judah, yeah.
Zion ben Judah, these people definitely have talked to real Jewish people.
Mm.
He's doesn't get raptured, despite being very knowledgeable and being very deep in the Jewish faith. So it plays with these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of international bankers and people planning a one world government and the Illuminati and cabals.
Mm-hmm. There's no
but
material
it also
analysis
wants
to
you
it.
to like support Israel. It's very weird.
It's the sort of conclusion that one comes to when you look at an entire people as a means to an end, essentially.
Exactly right. And later in the series, it gets into the weeds about the 146,000 Jews who convert, and this series gets wild. This book is barely the tip of the iceberg, and I don't want to go any deeper than that. So to forge on, Buck's got a contact in Scotland Yard who ends up getting killed, and Buck has to go undercover. Meanwhile, there is a guy rising to prominence on the world stage. He is a stone cold hottie. He is from Romania. He is rich. He is charismatic. He has, everyone likes him. He's against war. He's against hunger. He is President Nicolae Carpathia
of Romania. Yes,
of Romania,
and a very effectively written character, because I think he's the best character in the book.
He's the best written character in the book, easy, and he's the best acted character in the movie.
Yeah, and it's very appropriate for the role he plays in the story. Do we want to just drop it right here? He's the Antichrist.
My man is the Antichrist. Nicolae Carpathia is the Antichrist, and it's pretty clear from the jump. I wish there had been a little more mystery to it. It kind of tries to throw you off, like, ooh, maybe Jonathan Stonagel is the Antichrist. No, he's not. It's Nicolae Carpathia.
Jonathan Stonagel. He's built up as kind of the man behind the man, because he is this all-powerful banker that has police stations and world leaders in his pocket, and he can move mountains.
I do like that one line. It says, "My boss literally moves mountains," and he's talking about controlling Carpathia, the Carpathian Mountains. Kind of clever.
Yeah.
Credit where credit's due. But Carpathia is this peace advocate from Romania who is literally made the head of Romania, the president of Romania, without an election or anything.
Just by acclamation, yeah.
Yeah, they just love him that much. He shows up at the UN. Everybody loves him. Chaim Rosenzweig loves him, despite being very cagey, because he's got this formula that has made Israel rich. Everyone who watches him, and he's calling for peace. He's calling for denuclearization. He's calling for treaties across the world. He's saying we should feed every person, and it's one thing, right, to have a character that is lying, which of course Nicolae Carpathia is. But there is, of course, a more sinister element to what is happening in Tim LaHaye's mind here, which is the idea that the promise of using government to achieve a better world is inherently satanic.
Yes. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. The scariest words to a guy like him.
Right, exactly. And Nicolae Carpathia, Tim, he literally comes out of Eastern Europe, and he's playing on anti-communism here. He's playing on these sort of fears, and he's playing on these fears of the UN. You don't hear as much of the anti-UN stuff anymore, just because I think everyone has broadly accepted the UN as a joke by now. But it was big deal in the 90s to be like, oh, the UN, that's going to be the one world government that ushers in the Antichrist. These sort of things like that, which of course Nicolae Carpathia will eventually remodel the UN to the GC, the global community. And of course you have the word community in there. He's more than hinting. He's like nodding, like, any policies at redistribution, any policies at feeding people, at anti-war, at any of these things, no matter how in line they are with Christian principles, are the work of actual Satan, which he actually believes is actually controlling an Illuminati that is actually controlling a large part of the world. The writer actually believes this, and he believes in Nikolai Carpathia or some equivalent will be a final expression of that. And that is the conclusion to this part 1 of our Left Behind discussion. Thank you for listening to The Socialist Shelf. Please check us out on social media, tell a friend, rate, all those good things. Keep listening to us, keep reading, keep investigating, keep changing the world, y'all. And we'll see you right back here next week with part 2 of our Left Behind conversation.